Hey, friends. I feel like there's no normal guest on this podcast anymore and no normal length for the episodes. So, my guests have been so diverse and interesting that each episode takes on a life of its own. It's about sharing stories and resourcing you, the listener. My guest this week is extra unique because of his extensive career history and current position as executive director of the Los Angeles Coalition for the Economy and Jobs. For this reason, this episode skews a bit longer because we not only talk about his experience and his career journey, but we discuss the economy, job creation, emerging industries in the LA area, and much more. This was a fun interview that took a lot of turns, including finding out that we are both the product of public school teachers. And we figured out who our connection is on LinkedIn, which is where I connected with Michael to be a guest. We also have a good conversation about coaching in your career, and I would be amiss if I didn't take a minute to talk about my own coaching program, Control Your Career. I created this 12-week program based on my 10 years of coaching and mentoring professionals and my training as a career coach and strategist. It's a 5-module program that digs into your current reality, explores your personality and preferences, helps you create a custom plan, and hone your habits to ultimately take control of your career. If you're ready to level up, but you know that you need some support of a strategic and action-oriented coach, this is a program you'll want to check out. Feel free to connect with me on LinkedIn to learn more. I'll link my profile in the blog post for this episode. If you're looking for links to the resources mentioned in this episode, of which there are many, you can head over to ridethetidecollective.com/podcast to find the episode blog. And as always, I will link it in the show notes. If you want to connect with me or need inspirational and educational career management and advancement content, you can follow Ride the Tide Collective on Instagram, Facebook, or LinkedIn. I am also on Clubhouse now at Ride the Tide COL. If you're loving these interviews, please subscribe to the podcast, leave a review on Apple Podcasts, or subscribe on YouTube. Welcome, everyone. Thank you for joining us for this episode. This is actually a little bit of a special episode for me. I reached out to Michael Kelly a couple weeks ago because of the work that he has been doing with the Los Angeles Coalition for the Economy and Jobs. But also, his background is very unique and very interesting. So we're going to dig into his career path, and we're also going to dig into the work that he's doing with the coalition. So just to give you a little bit of an idea, the LA Coalition for the Economy and Jobs is a nonprofit bipartisan organization that brings together leaders from business, labor, academia, and nonprofits to advance initiatives that generate economic growth, create quality jobs, which we love hearing, and a skilled workforce, and improve the region's overall quality of life. And because I'm originally from Southern California and have lived for a long time in the LA area, I just love the work that the coalition is doing. And that's one of the main reasons I wanted to bring Michael on. But also, in terms of his own background, he has worked in a number of high-level positions in the private sector with Boeing and a couple others, as well as, and this is, I think, the coolest thing, he's worked with the California Governor, Gray Davis, as well as Arnold Schwarzenegger. So he's had this background in history in the government sector. He's now doing this coalition. Plus, there's the life before government, which we're also going to talk about, that might include golf. And it's very interesting. So, Michael, thank you so much for agreeing to be on my podcast and sharing all of your knowledge and wisdom and good work with my audience.
Thank you for inviting me and hosting me on for today. I look forward to the conversation, and I have to give kudos. I think LinkedIn is really a great use of technology to connect people of like mind and kind of like ambition to help make the world a better place. So I'm glad you reached out, and I'm glad we're connected.
Yes, me too. Yes. And just to clarify a little bit further, I did a cold reach out to Michael, and we actually had some similar connections, which I think helps. But I did a cold outreach to ask him to be on the podcast. So if you're somebody that's afraid to put yourself out there, don't be, find some common ground and put yourself out there. And I know that that's something that's going to come up in some of the questions that we're going to have later on. But to start us off, I would love for you to talk a little bit about your career path. And I want to go back to that post-college time because you have such an interesting set of transitions that you've had. So can you share a little bit about that path with us?
Sure. And as I go into the path of which I've gone down, I think one of the key things to remember too is it's all dependent, not all of it, but some is dependent on your upbringing and the values that have been instilled in you. My father was a public school teacher. My mother worked in the, hospitality industry. But it was always about, having purpose and trying to make a difference. And, no matter how well I do in life, I want to make sure other people are doing just as well. So, yes, there was a uniqueness in my background that lent to, I think, taking advantage of that to where I am today. I did get a undergraduate degree in economics from the University of Massachusetts in Amherst. Love that area, love the school and all the professors and students there. But prior to that, I had been a big athlete in baseball and soccer and golf. And one of the things I enjoyed in golf, I was an all-scholastic award winner for the Boston Globe in golf. And so when I had that economics degree, I had a little stint for New York Life and in the city of Boston, but I was a Cape Codder where you could hear crickets outside the screen door at night. And, my friends were playing professional golf and working at some clubs. And I was like, wow, that could be an exciting thing to do right now in my life. Because golf, you can play with anybody at any age. You can't play pickup basketball with an 80-year-old CEO
Right.
or great writer or, a woman that's done phenomenal things and so I actually chose to go and work and play professional golf for a few years back in New England and in Florida and Southern Florida, and met the most amazing people from all around the world and had amazing experiences. And there's a lot to be taught about that because, golf's not the easiest sport, and
Yeah.
it requires some dedication, commitment, and discipline, but it requires resilience and adapting to every different lie, every different condition, rain, snow,
Right.
wind, and some of that stuff. So I've kind of learned to harness that experience with ultimately where, we'll talk about where I went from there.
I love hearing that because I used to work back in the day. I worked in higher ed. I worked with a lot of student athletes. I was one of the people that the football team ended up coming to a lot. I don't know how that happened. It's like you see one, then all of a sudden you see all of them. And I loved working with student athletes or anybody who is an athlete, not just on the student side, but even in your personal life, people who are athletes or have an athletic mindset. I feel like their approach to work can be a little bit different. So that's one side of it, but the other side of it is recognizing how many transferable skills you have from that athletic experience that go into your work life. And I always used to encourage people to talk about whatever that sport is or whatever that activity is. So even if you're mid-career, but you're a marathoner or you do some of these other fitness challenges, those are really great opportunities to talk about your dedication, your ability to train, be coached, your mindset. I think all of that is really important when you're moving forward in your career, a job search, and just being able to talk to people. That's a different skill set than other people might bring to the table.
Yeah, to that end, it's you have to be really focused, right? You have to have some goals of, what's the element of the game? What do you need to achieve to be better, ultimately to win the competition? So yes, I think there's a lot of that in creating good habits, and building on those habits, and then learning from your mistakes and recalibrating. Because I always go back to this study, I think that Harvard had done, a longitudinal study in like was it 1919 or 12, around there. And they followed these people. John F. Kennedy actually was one of the students at the time they followed over a length of time. And the people that ended up having the most successful lives, not just financially, but all around as a human being, are ones who learn how to adapt.
Mm.
No matter how talented some of the people were when they were younger, if they weren't able to adapt, certain things came into their lifestyle, diseases and other things affected their life.
Right.
So I think sports teach you how to adapt in the moment quickly and think on your feet, or to recalibrate when you get back to the driving range or your practice. But the other thing too, what I remember, what I really appreciated out of sports, I played an instrument, trumpet too, right? And there's always a competition for that first chair. The important parts about it is when you won, you felt what it's like to win. You'll hear a lot of times when people, and this can be translated into the world of winning a job too, is if you don't see yourself as a winner and capable of winning,
Mm-hmm.
you talk yourself out of it. And you see it with teams that fault in a Super Bowl, fault, in a major championship tournament. And and I believe you can talk yourself into winning, and then it's just reinforced when you have won. But that's why I think getting kids out to play, to whether it's recess and having fun, is it gets, we start getting into one of my favorite, counselors, writers, Simon Sinek, talking about oxytocin, right? Or how to
Yes.
better channel, dopamine for good, is you get those feelings and it just kind of reinforces. So I think the point here is try to figure out how to take small wins if you need to start there. And now that you know what it feels like to win, talk yourself into it.
Absolutely. Well, and right now with the pandemic and COVID, that adaptability muscle is being stretched for a lot of people. And I think you're seeing some people do well and excel with it, and other people it's taking them out because it's bringing up other things in their life and all of that. But I feel like the people who can take a step back and go, okay, what's going on here? This has brought a lot of other things to light. How can I, not we, how can I manage myself in a different way so that we can make it through this? And a tip that I gave on social media quite a few months ago, like mid pandemic, was look, how you're treating yourself during this pandemic and how you're operating. Yes, it's hard. And there are some people that have different mental health issues and all of that. But if you're able to turn some of your world around to be able to figure this out and adapt and all of that, that is something to talk about. That is something to use as a conversation point when you're networking with somebody, when you're in an interview. These are all skills that we're still amassing because we're always learning, we're always developing new skills. And I think quite a few people are flexing some skills and muscles that they haven't had to flex in a long time because the pandemic has shifted their thought process and their way of thinking. So yeah, that adaptability piece I think is huge. And those who have practiced it for a long time, I think have come into this with a different mindset because they're able to make some of those shifts a little bit easier, even when it gets really hard.
I mean, COVID-19 is one of those things that if you weren't comfortable, being uncomfortable before COVID, yeah, it's going to make life a little bit harder. But that kind of goes back into, I think, the theme that I always hit on in my life is you gotta do something every day that's just a little out of the scope of your comfort zone. Or just not that too, is on that piece is what really drives you? What are your intrinsic values and drivers? And I bet you everybody's got that novel in them or a screenplay in them, or they want to be a good photographer or a baker, or they just want to be an avid, recreational person doing something, because there's a mental outlet, one, and what it could be a physical outlet too. But the other part too is that ability, like I always kind of reference the elevator ride. Sometimes when you're not as sociable, you step in an elevator and somebody says something funny or witty and they engage with you, and next thing you know, you got the biggest smile on your face. It's infectious. And learning that kind of skill of just making eye contact, saying hello, can just open up your world of possibilities. So the reason I reference the elevator, because everybody's been in an elevator, everybody knows the situation when the door opens. It's kind of like, who knows is in that elevator, right? And I don't think it sounds silly, but I think it's just, I'm using that because it's easier to interact with somebody because you're forced to in the elevator as opposed to just randomly smiling at everybody in the street.
Right. Well, and that's such a good networking opportunity that a lot of people miss because they either just don't want to interact with other people or their mind is somewhere else. They get onto the elevator thinking about, they're 10 steps ahead in their day instead of living in that moment of who's here, who's standing right next to me, and what if I just said hello, and what if I smiled, and what if we had just a short conversation in the 15 seconds we're going to be on this elevator together. You don't know what they're going through either. That might make their day. And I think that's great, even for people who are a little bit more shy. I know I'm not necessarily the one that's going to say something first in the elevator, even though that's what I tell people to do. But I try to be present and recognize, what do people look like? Do they look okay? Do they look happy? Are they managing a small child and they look stressed out? And I think just acknowledging that we are humans and we are in the same space, sometimes that is just enough to make somebody's day and also help your day refocus or reset in some way to get focused on being in the moment.
Somebody, I read it somewhere because people say these things in different versions over time. And I say it to my kids, the simplicity of being a great noticer. Right? Everybody talks about self-awareness and all that stuff. It's good, but being a great noticer, and that's just notice things around you.
Yes.
And it's true because, some people are having a tough day. Some people are having a great day. You can acknowledge it in different ways, but that goes back to the Daniel Goleman, emotional intelligence.
Right.
And that kind of goes back into a lot of, all things that we talk about when it comes to our career. Really, it's really about just human beings. It's about social interaction.
Right.
Some are better at it than others, but it's a significant part of our life. Like you read any Peter Drucker, it's culture each strategy for breakfast.
Yep.
And it's the culture of an organization. Is say, if you're looking for your dream job, look for the right person you want to work for or with. Not just the brand, like I want to go work for this big Fortune 50 company. I want to do this and that because, people get eaten alive in those places and taken advantage in some of them. Not all of them. There's some good ones, but it's just like, how do people treat other people? And everybody should deserve and look for that and not just accept what is.
Right. Well, and that starts with understanding yourself. Who are you? How do you work? And then, working for other people and recognizing, oh, I liked this in this person and this in this person, but this one did not go so great. And as you continue working, or even volunteering, it doesn't have to be formal work, any situation where you're working with other people, even your parents or, any interaction where you go, I like this, I don't like this. Keeping a tally of that. And then as you start to transition, you can now ask different questions when you're in an informational interview or an actual interview about the management style of that group or that team, so that you know what you're walking into. Because especially some of those more, I guess, quote unquote, glamorous companies like the Facebooks and the Google and all that, that's a huge company with a lot of people in it. And you might get a great manager and you might not. just because it's Facebook, just because it's Google, it doesn't mean that every person working there is going to be the right person for you or the right manager for you. And you have to be aware of that going into a situation before you get stuck into it. And so doing some of that self-reflection is really, really helpful on the onset.
And there was, because I know probably people listening to this and some of the podcasts is, like I said, I behave like I have a trust fund, even though I don't have one. And I say that as in, because you've got to, if one of the biggest characteristics that you can say is, being authentic, be who you are. And, sometimes it might get in you're getting your own way, and other times you're not. But to the people that are saying, well, look, yeah, I have bills to pay. I'm in a company or a job that just doesn't really excite me. I have a bad boss and all that. Well, the truth is, I've had a couple really not so good bosses that put you in predicaments you didn't want to be in. But you know what? I am so much stronger for trying to figure out how to deal with it, face it, and then figure out my escape route.
Yes.
And you can't bail, or you can't just kind of wallow in it. There is always, you can create opportunities. And I would say every job that I have had so far in my life, I started working at the age of 9, is a lot of it had to do with doing work outside the scope of my job. And there's always room to help somebody on a project, to provide some counsel, some advice, to provide anything that they might need. It's just as simple as, how can I help? Or saying, okay, here's an opportunity. I want to help. I want to be a little more assertive and express how I can help. But there's enough to do it. It's just a matter of how people want to balance their lives, because there are 24 hours in a day, and most of us sleep around 6 to 8 hours. That's a lot of time.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Okay. So toxic management is one of my main tenets in my counseling practice, my coaching practice, because I think we all have had, bad management experiences at some time or another. And I used that to fuel my career forward. And so now I love working with people. This is going to sound a little weird, but I love working with people who are either currently in situations where they're in a toxic culture or toxic manager, or they're coming out of it, because their mindset is so different. And I love being able to help them uncover what their truth is. And that's one of my main things is I want you to look at whatever that toxic situation is and go, is it me? Was this something that I did? And be really honest about that. Or can I find empathy for the person who's treating me this way? Do I understand enough about their situation? Do I understand enough about who they are as a person, the role that they have in the organization? And what is that truth between us? And I had a situation like that where I didn't show up at my best, and I owned that, and I did the work to fix it and shift it and all of that. But as I was doing that, also recognized that the manager had issues too. And I was able to, because I took a step back and looked at their situation and looked at who they were and their pressures and all that, I was able to shift my anger into empathy. And it changed our working relationship enough that I was able to get through that period of time before shifting into something else, because it just wasn't a good fit. And that's something that I always like to share with people, that story, because a lot of times we get so taken up with the anger and the frustration and how could they be this way? And, and we blame and blame and blame, but we don't take that time to look at ourselves, and we don't take that time to find the empathy piece. So I appreciate you bringing that up. I think it's a really great point.
Yeah, it's in sports, it's usually not the person that does the shove or the elbow or the push, it's the reaction. The person who does the reacting to it gets the call. And I do agree. It's that looking at the other person, because that kind of goes back into if you think about some of the companies, the way their culture, right? It's sometimes it's the most difficult part is a lot of people aspire to be in these big companies. And what's interesting, some of the big companies like to transfer people from within or promote from within because they're saying it's a lot harder from somebody outside to understand the culture than it is to the issue.
Right.
And then, so, okay, if you understand the culture, you're in the culture. I mean, yeah, you're kind of setting up mid managers to fail in a way.
Mm.
Because if you think about the GE model, and Boeing had this too, kind of command and control in some of the houses, you're up or you're out.
Mm.
And then there's the people that they've gotten into the mid-career positions, they get compensated very well, but they know they're not going to, they either don't aspire or they're not on the leadership chain going upward. So what do they need to do? They need to make sure that anybody below them is giving them all the great work so they can take credit for it to maintain their position, at the same time keeping them down.
Right.
And so yeah, so then that's you have to determine if you're somebody who's in a position like that, you're either the person ahead of you is going to leave the position and you're going to take it over at some point, but if that's never going to happen, or it's not a good, healthy, oxytocin producing environment, then yeah, you've got to be real with yourself.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, everybody's got a mortgage to pay, everybody's got money they need to survive, but I guarantee you, if you're good at what you do, you understand what that is worth out in the marketplace, is sooner or later, hopefully people are going to see that and understand it. And if that requires you to do more civic engagement, community engagement outside your organization, then that's a way you can go out and do that stuff.
Right. Right. I would love to know your thoughts on what I'm about to say.
Yeah.
So, as you were talking, one of the things that I was thinking about was, we have managers who are like what you described, I want all the people under me to bring me all the good work so I look good, but I don't necessarily aspire to anything more than this role. I don't want more responsibility. I really want to stay here, whatever here is. Do you think that people in that position, though, they should still support the people who are coming up, even if those people end up jumping over them in some way? Because what's the point then? Does that make sense?
No, it does 100%. It's just a matter of, it all depends on the company. It all depends. Yeah, that's because that's the boss you want. The boss you want is, hey, I want you to grow personally and professionally, and you know who you are. And if there's certain things you want to work on, we'll get an executive coach or I'll mentor you.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm going to be proud that, yes, you become the president of the company or CEO or something, you go on to bigger things. And I'm like, yeah, they used to work for me. A lot of people have that sense of pride. And I like to think there's a lot more of those people out there. And I think it's something that's changed over the last 3 decades too. Because I think there was some companies, it's kind of old school of, you either do what I tell you to, or you put your badge on the table and you leave. No matter what the circumstances are, your kid's first birthday, the birth of a child, or anything. Right. It's like, those are some of the ways that, some that kind of built industrial America.
Right.
Fortunately, now we have child labor laws and we have other things, but it's still kind of, it goes back to people.
Right.
And kind of figuring out is, you want to go into work, you can kind of, you're fighting the world every day. So you want to go back to a nice, healthy household, but you don't want to go into work and fight with the people you spend more time with sometimes in your family.
Right.
So you got to make a determination of not having you changed by an environment and not be good, or if it's a great environment, to thrive in it.
Right.
But you always, whether or not your work's getting appropriated in ways you don't want or ways you do want, you better make sure that people know who you are, what you do, and what your outcomes have been every year. Like focus on resetting every year. It's like, what is the one thing I want to get out of this year in my life? Because times get tough, companies do make cutbacks, things happen. And from what I've learned over the years and watching who gets laid off and who doesn't, sometimes they lay off the people that just nobody really gets along with. and they use that as an opportunity to make them go first. And other times they're like, you could say, hey, I've been doing amazing work, I'm fine. Then something happens, you're laid off, you're like, I don't understand, these are all the things I did. And they're like, but you never told me, or nobody already knew. So
Yes.
I've had a career where I don't like tooting my own horn and talking about myself a lot, but I'm starting to learn, it's like, I better worry about Michael Kelly.
Right.
And when my name comes up in a conversation, what comes to mind for people?
Right.
So
I think that's a great reminder for every professional out there to make sure that whoever you're reporting to knows who you are, and not just obviously by name. I know they know who you are, but they really know what are you doing. And I was talking to a client, this was maybe, I don't know, 6 months ago, and they were having a hard time with their manager. And I was like, but have you told your manager what you want to get out of this position? Have you been clear about that? And he was like, no, I haven't. I was like, okay, then your manager is just going to keep operating in a way that's natural for them until they get more information that helps them recalibrate how they're thinking. And so I think even to the example that I was asking about, that manager who maybe they don't want to go any higher because they like the balance that they have in their position. They like their position. They want to stay there. Letting your boss know, hey, I really like it here. I like being a manager. I like being in this position. I'm not necessarily aspiring for this next position, but I really want to help bring up, this next generation, whatever that looks like in the company, of the workforce. How can I help do that to the best of my ability? Because then you're still a value in that position, and you can still support people. And I think you're right. I think in the last couple decades, and I always talk about the next couple of decades, what that's going to look like. I don't think we're going to see this iron fist management style of you have to do everything that I say, and, hierarchy. I think that will still exist in some areas. But I think as we see that probably Gen X, millennial generation, the elder millennials, start to get into some of these higher positions, I think we're going to see a little bit of a shift. What do you think about that?
I think so. I mean, I hope so. I do the one shift I do see, and I know everybody piles on millennials and everybody else, is I worry about it. It's like we've created in the United States, we've created a consumer economy. So about 78% of our economy thrives on consumption. And how do you get people to buy things and buy more of it in a lot of ways? And so it's kind of the instant gratification over time is accelerated in a way. And I worry about if you get down to the most simplest things in life, I just say go for a walk for an hour, drink water, read for an hour a day, do writing, not just read because that's passive, but write, that's active. Like you start thinking about just the simplicity of life, and everybody needs shelter. We need more housing. Everybody needs an education or a way to acquire the skills that don't cost them a fortune to get the next level job. And everyone needs access to healthcare. Like you start thinking about all these like simple things in life. But I do feel in a way is that and the Chinese figured this out when they studied this, as Xi Jinping and the former leaders, is they feel like in America, they've overpromised their citizens. And that's why it took a while for China to figure out how to open up their domestic market, not just their export. They feel like we've overpromised our citizens. And what happens when you make promises you can't deliver on, one of the great examples is we have amazing universities in town and everywhere else, but everybody's been promised, like we bailed on community colleges and we didn't fund them for a number of years. A lot of the other private DeVry and other places popped up to kind of fill that void. And then now we're back on the community colleges, but we keep on like promising all these kids, like you get a 4-year degree which is really, in a sense, yes, it's a good experience, but the moment you're accepted into a Harvard or UCLA, that's all the credential you need. And we've
Right.
become this like credentialed society where that's your ticket. And for some people, it is their ticket, but for hundreds of thousands of other kids who are told you get your credential, you do this apprenticeship, you get your degree, the life is all, this amazing life is there. And if we've kind of given away our industrial base and we haven't really kind of figured out in America, like what's the future we have around renewables, new space and blue economy and other things and some tech, some of that's becoming a little more concentrated. So I guess in a way is I am concerned that I feel like we've overpromised things to a lot of people, and we're kind of paying for it right now. People are upset,
Yeah,
and they're angry, and we just on the public policy side is we have to figure out how to not allow an acceleration in of the trend of concentration. It's called population sorting, where people with all the talent and the ability to get the jobs, the purple squirrels they call in tech and everywhere else, all flock to the coastal regions or to the Austin, Texas, or Park City, Utah, and they get all the jobs where a company doesn't need, a Boeing could have 100,000 people in California. Now all they need is 12,000. Warner Brothers used to have scores of people, but now they jump ship and they get paid less working for Netflix. And you've got this fewer people making more money at different levels of 250,000 and up. Well, you have everybody else kind of servicing that. And so the challenge that we face is this recession we're in because of COVID is our very first service-oriented recession. Right? It's not caused by housing or some of the other stuff. And we've discovered that when wealth is concentrated, there's a whole flock of population of people that service that wealth. And the wealth are spending less money. The wealthy are spending less money during COVID because of pent up, consumerism, than people who don't have any money. So if the wealthy don't spend their money, then everybody that takes care of their dogs, their houses, and parks their cars and feeds them at restaurants and all that, that's kind of what we're seeing. So it's kind of I guess, I'm kind of going back and forth and interweaving a lot of this stuff. I just feel like we've overpromised and we've treated higher ed like it's a mortgage. And, there's a debt to pay without the reward that it once was, and a bunch of other things. So.
Right. That's such an interesting perspective. And I come out of higher ed, so I have a lot of opinions on higher ed. And I am actually I'm a proponent in whatever is best for the person. And so I think for some people, higher ed is a great option depending on the path that they want to take in life. But sometimes it's not. If you have a vision for yourself that doesn't include a degree, that's okay. You can go to community college. There are a lot of other educational options out there. And I know some people, they want the degree, or they've been told that that's what they need, or their parents expect that of them. Whatever that looks like for you, that's fine. But is it worth the debt you're going to get into when there isn't a promise of a position on the other side? And I used to work in career development. So that was one of the hardest parts of my job, was just because you're getting a degree, because I worked at liberal arts institutions. So just because you're getting a degree does not mean that you are going to get a job at the end of it, or that you're prepared to do a job. And if all you've done is take these courses, unless you've done a professional degree, so nursing, something like that, teaching, then you're likely going to have to do the internship, or you're going to have to work, you're going to have to do something before you can land that quote unquote ideal dream, whatever you want to say, job. And that was a hard pill for a lot of people to swallow when they got to me as a senior getting ready to graduate, because they were fed a different promise, and so there was a lot of, I think, miscommunication and misunderstanding of what the quote unquote university was going to provide for them at the end of that time. And I think especially right now, because of COVID, we're seeing a spotlight being put on higher ed and its value. And where is that going when you have companies like Google who are saying, you don't need to have a degree, go through this training that we have put together because this is what we actually need, and there's going to be a job on the other side of it. So
Yeah, but and this goes back into, like, in this country, we really have to get back into this K through 12 focus, because it goes back into, it's, the research that shows, if you come from an affluent community and you're not a great student, you're going to do better than someone who comes from an underserved community and you're a person of color that could be an exceptional student.
absolutely.
And so I think we have to figure out, and plus it's part of it, this goes into the exposure, right? Why do people choose what they do for a living? That's what I'm fascinated by. How do they keep themselves busy throughout the day and put some money in their pocket and make a living, and measure success in different ways? When I was at Boeing, I used to go talk in classrooms, and the one question kids would always go to all the time, especially middle school and high school, is, how much do you make? And my answer would always be, is, my father was a public school teacher for 30 years and he never measured success by money. But they still focused on that part.
Right.
And but the other part I remember is, I grew up in a small area of Cape Cod, Massachusetts, right? You got family that are fishermen, they're builders, and it's a kind of hospitality, retail service oriented place. You go into Boston, you see big buildings. You have no idea what's going on in those buildings if you're not exposed to it.
Right.
So it goes back into, I know there's a lot of great mentor programs like Year Up and Spark and other things in the LA region, or throughout the country. Is we've got to give kids and others, even if they're in mid-career, opportunities to be exposed to other things if they want to.
Right.
And because it's like, you're never going to know what you don't see.
Right. Right.
And so, yeah, that's another key theme.
Well, I think for people who are in mid-career, I think sometimes they feel lost, right? You go through school, you go to college, maybe you go into a grad program, and everything's laid out for you, and the networking sessions are there, and you meet alumni and all of that. And then you get into this mid-career place where you're mostly talking to people who do what you do. If you're in a professional association, it's likely connected to your industry or your actual functional area. But there are actually other networking groups out there that are more diverse. So they're either location oriented, or they might have some other kind of random interest or something like that. And that is a great way for you to expand that knowledge if you're in a place where you're not quite sure what's out there, but maybe you got into the field that you're in because that's what your parents did, or that's what you were told you needed to do. I've seen that happen a lot. And now you're at a point where you're like, I really don't like doing this. I don't want to continue doing this. And joining some of those networking groups, and they're different across, areas, states, and all of that. But that's really helpful to just learn more and meet people in a more controlled environment that I think a lot of us are used to because of coming up through school and having things curated for us, essentially.
And you've got to be open to the possibility of, someone once said, is find something that you like to do, find someone who's going to pay you to do it. There's a lot of people out there who have found success in life that are so open and so willing to help people that reach out to them.
Yes.
And you could do it, you can guess their email, or if you're ready. I read so many, newspapers in the morning. I read so many magazines, different books. I scour everything. And once people know that you do that, they send you even more stuff. And you'll find like fascinating articles on people that might be part of your community or leader in your own company. And right. I bet you you figure out how to get that a note to them saying, I read this. I really appreciate that you wrote it. This really meant a lot to me, or this, I'd like to learn more. Any chance, I can say hello,
Mm-hmm.
at some point in time, or we can, break bread together. And, it's a hit or miss, because some people might be really busy. They might be willing to do it, but people, people like that. They're like, I was in that position once and somebody said, hey, yeah, I'm going to help you out. And then the other point too, I was thinking about as we talk about this.
Hey friends, Julia here. I wanted to take a break in the interview to share about a new resource you're going to want to sign up for. Career management and advancement is often one of the most overlooked areas of our life when it comes to personal growth and investment, even though we spend about a third or more of our day working in said career. Now is the time to start investing in yourself and your career, and the Career Hack Masterclass is the best first step. This 5-part video masterclass with subtitles takes you through some of my process along with some of my best actionable tips to start advancing your career now. Normally, a masterclass like this would be a $200 to $300 investment, but I am giving it away for free because I want to see you start to take control of your career. Head over to controlyourcareernow.com/careerhackmasterclass to sign up and start investing in your career today. For those who do sign up, there is a special offer that you'll want to take advantage of, which is also free. Hint, it might include a session with me. Again, head over to controlyourcareernow.com/careerhackmasterclass to sign up today. I'll leave the link in the show notes and blog post for this episode. Now let's get back to the interview.
The one thing, going back into my kind of every year, I have kind of my own theme in life is for anybody sitting in a job right now and kind of, muddling through life with some of this stuff is, it's a really good thing to do that makes you feel good no matter what you did at work. Is work's usually asking you to do something for them, for the company, for the mission and everything else. Is figure out something. It could be work related too, as a special project, or something tied to the company external too, is make something your own. So, at the end of that 6 months, you can readjust and you have something. If it's your own, then you have a chance to talk with somebody and get mentored. Like, what do you think after the 6 months? You've been working on this and said, you have thought about this and this, and you kind of recalibrate on that. But at the end of that project, no matter how long it is, don't make it too long. It was yours.
Right.
And then that starts getting you down the path of find something that you like to do. If you're good at it, then someone's ultimately, and that gets you out of the box too. Because no matter how you become good at something, you're now in that box. And sometimes people don't see you as anything else.
Right. So make sure you like doing the thing that you're in the box for.
Yes. If you find yourself in that box and you're doing extremely well, it's very good. But at the end of the day, I think it still kind of comes down to, just for your own mental health and sake of whether you want to pick up badminton or something else, have something outside of the box. But I think you got to shake up with a lot of people who rely on you. They like you, they employ you, and they go to you. You got to keep them on their toes too. You want to be reliable, but in a sense, you got to keep them on their toes to know that it's just more than what they see.
Right. Well, and it's being active. It's being active in your career instead of being passive and letting it just happen to you, or letting a manager tell you, this is what you need to do. This is what you need to do. You do have a little bit of control there, but you have to articulate it and make sure that it fits in with the scope of what you're doing and what the organization needs. So yeah, that's such a great tip. I love that. Thank you for sharing that. Okay, so I want to go back to your career path. I know you don't like talking about yourself. I'm going to pull you back. I want to know, how did you get into the government side of your career? Because you worked for two of California's very well-known governors, Gray Davis and Arnold Schwarzenegger. Like, how did you get there? What led you to that? Because I know there are people who are interested in the government sector or getting into it. And I would love to know more about that journey.
Sure. So when I was living in California, I was probably 25 when I moved out here. I had transitioned more to the golf business and less the golf playing. And, I decided I like politics. My father's a school teacher. Some school teachers run for local office.
Mhm.
I'd walked some precincts, and my dad had told some political stories. As your parents get older, sometimes they actually tell you, like my grandfather had on my dad's side passed away when I was born, that he was in politics in Boston. And I
Hmm.
was like, oh, that's interesting. And but I was always drawn to biographies and politicians and everybody else. So I actually, honestly, 25 years old, working full time at a golf club and teaching lessons and doing some of that stuff, I picked up the Yellow Pages and I looked up Senator Barbara Box's office and I looked up Gray Davis's office, being a little more Democratic leaning. Called Box's office, they never called back. Called uh, Lieutenant Governor's office. Somebody called me back. I said, look, I'm 25, I'm a golf pro. They thought I was a Republican plant working at a country club. Is it turned out that the woman who was his scheduler was the same age as me, and she grew up in Holyoke, Massachusetts.
Oh, wow.
And then there was another woman there who was phenomenal, who someone had helped her along the way. So they said, come in, and they chatted about internships and said, well, we give the internships to kids who are already in school. You already have a degree. I said, okay, that's fair. I just wanted to help. 2 weeks later, the phone rings. Why don't you come in? So I used to get up at 4:30 in the morning, work at the club from 6 to 2:30. I'd drive downtown from the Palisades, that kind of area, drive downtown, pay $7 out of my own pocket for parking 3 days a week, and work for free for the rest of the afternoon to 7. Then I socialized with the young staff, but that led to being compensated. And that led to this guy's running for governor. Why don't you work in the campaign? That led to Gray Davis having to play golf at Stanford. Michael's a golfer. But what was one of the really turning points, though, was the staff built up a little. We didn't know if Dianne Feinstein was going to run. Al Checky running against had a ton of money. Some of the people started abandoning Gray at a point in time in the campaign. Was, I don't think he's going to win. So there's only a couple of us left. And here I am, I'm 26 now, right and new into all the California politics. And he comes in one day and someone was going to cancel an event in New York City. He comes to me and asks for advice. So I started giving him some advice. And then I realized, you know what? I want to work directly for him. I don't want to report to anybody else. And I don't want to have to, I want to take direction from the person who's in charge.
Right.
I said, I want to be your gatekeeper. Anything that you need 24/7, I will do. And he said, let's try it out. Next thing you know, we won the primary, we won the general, and I'm on the phone with President Clinton, Al Gore, Bill Bradley. I'm on with all the leaders. And I'm like, this is incredible. So helped set up an administration in Sacramento. So it took him 25 years to get to that seat. And here I am as a golf pro at 25 and now 28 years old. I'm in Sacramento outside the governor's office, all because I opened up the Yellow Pages.
That's amazing. Okay, in another interview, the woman that I was interviewing, she actually worked for Yellow Pages. And this was like, I don't know, maybe 5 years ago or something like that. And we actually explained what Yellow Pages was in the interview, just in case people didn't know what a phone book was. Because we just don't get them. I mean, obviously, most of us know, but some of the younger generation, they've never known a phone book before. Although funny, I'm in Utah and we actually got a phone book about a month ago. And my husband and I were like, why are we getting this? But yeah, so they still do print them from time to time, I guess. I thought that was really interesting. Okay, I love your story because what I'm picking out from that, and you can correct me if I'm wrong in assuming this, is you knew sort of what you wanted, you put yourself out there, and you were willing to really hustle to get to whatever that next place was. And it sounds like at the beginning of that, you probably weren't even sure where it was gonna land, but you knew you just wanted to follow that path. And I love that determination and grit at that point in your life. I think if more people embraced that in their career, I think you would see people really making different types of decisions and transitions, especially early on, because opportunities open up when you take chances.
Yes, and when there's less chips on the table, using the parlance of gambling, right, then you can take some of those chances. But I that kind of goes back into, um, even if I have a lot of chips on the table right now in the career I've established myself on, I still, take some chances and do some stuff, outside of my daily scope, and kind of try to push the limits. And some of the other stuff there, because it wasn't just opening the Yellow Pages and taking advantage of the opportunities as I saw them. It was the taking advantages of other things. Of one of the things I developed over the years is learning to be a better writer and a communicator, and determining, what's missing in Los Angeles was to come to write up about the economy, about jobs, about trends, where we're going. And one of the big things is, well, we want not just to talk about things, we want things to happen. We want you to effectuate change. And I said, but sometimes people won't engage unless they're educated on an issue.
Right.
And if I can figure out how to educate them better, they're going to engage more. They're going to be more confident in what they're engaging on. So, one of those things I took in my life was there was a little pushback of creating some kind of document that educated. And now, because of that, I was, you get invited to a lot of different things, and now you got a viewpoint. Now you're at the table.
Right.
And now you're basically someone that people come to talk about the economy. But it's kind of like, a little risk you have to take. It's kind of, I think we all talk about it, but part of it is I think we're so instinctual as human beings that we know what's right and we know what's not right.
Mm-hmm.
We know what to kind of run with, and we have an inkling. So it's like really trust when your head or your stomach, whatever it is telling you, I think there's something there. And definitely trust is, no, I don't think someone would appreciate if I did this and the right path.
Yes,
So,
yes, the emotional intelligence piece of it.
yeah, and if you don't have it, because we're all wired differently and we're all raised differently. One of the best decisions I made too in my career was to speak up and say, I would like to get an executive coach.
Mm.
And I think most people would support an employee asking for that help, even if it's covered full time or you have to cover it, 50-50. It is so worth it.
Absolutely.
Because every day you have concerns about how your manager manages, but did you ever stop and think, how hard is it to manage Michael Kelly? What? And I said that to my board before, my board chair, and they get a chuckle and a laugh out of it, but it's true.
Right. Yeah, no, I absolutely agree. Now I'm a little biased because I'm a coach. So, so I absolutely think that coaching is essential, but a lot of times, and I do career management, career advancement. So a lot of times people think, oh, if I get a career coach, it's, I'm ready to transition, or I need a new job or something like that.
No,
And
not at all.
honestly, the best time for you to get a coach is when you're doing well at your job and you're almost in, I don't want to say mediocre, but you're like coasting a little bit. Like you've been in your job for a little bit and there are some areas I can improve upon. Maybe I want to make a transition at some point, but when you're in a space where you can actually take that coaching in and put it into practice in your career, the career management side, that actually makes the advancement piece much easier, because now you're making intentional choices and decisions of what that next step is going to look like. So instead of making a hasty decision or a high emotional decision because you're in some, I don't know, you could be in a toxic situation or you get laid off because of a pandemic or something like that. Instead of making that hasty choice, you've prepared now and you're ready. You know who you are, you know what you want, you know your strengths, and you can go forward in a different way because you have somebody who's helping you through that process. So thank you for saying that, because I think more people need to hear that, especially in that mid-career place. That is one of the best times to start the coaching process.
Yeah, don't inhibit yourself because your job is inhibiting you. Thinking about making sure that you stay relevant in the eyes of not just your family, but relevant in the eyes of your profession, whether it's the company you work in or the people you work for, is there could be a similar job in other parts of the company, outside the company, or other parts in another, industry somewhere else. So it's kind of, I always thought about it as like, marketing yourself. I guess being a self promoter is kind of difficult for most of us, but you're kind of going back into, if your name comes up in conversation, what's kind of the first things people think.
Right.
And one of the things I enjoyed when I decided I was going to leave the private sector and look for other work, when I started calling people, because this is the other thing you're going to learn too, is if you think someone's going to just randomly pick up the phone and call and say, I really want you to come work for me, it doesn't really work that way. You've got people, that's why people run for president. They're all saying, I can be better at that. That's a lot of self-promotion.
Right.
But Frank Luntz is a guy, is a political advisor, does tons of polling. And when I was thinking about the marketing piece of, is that the good way to frame something? I saw a quote, it came, he said is, brand is what you say about yourself. Reputation is what other people think about you. I was like, wow, that's an eloquent way of thinking about it then. Right? Yeah, of course, I can go out and say Michael Kelly, and I've done this or that, and done some good stuff, but it's the reputation, right?
No, I think that's great. And I think sometimes people don't spend enough time thinking about that, thinking about how they're portrayed in the workplace, especially if they've been somewhere for a while. I think there are some people who are really great at it and they have a pretty good pulse on their behavior and all of that. But I found that certain professionals who get into that mediocre lane in their career for whatever reason, a lot of times don't think about how that can actually negatively impact your reputation and that marketing piece, especially if you do want to end up making a move. If you've been performing at a really steady pace, which is great, but you're not necessarily going above and beyond anywhere, or you're not standing out in something, you're not going to be the person that's top of mind for somebody, because you're likely not going to be sharing that information anyway. And I was actually thinking, as we were talking a few minutes ago, you were talking about having an opinion. And I think this is also part of that reputation piece of you building up some of your reputation. I wanted to share a really tangible way for people to do that who might not think that they have an opinion or have a voice yet, because they're at a certain point in their career where they're more looking up to people. And the reality is, it doesn't matter where you are in your career. You could be a student up into CEO. You still have a voice and an opinion and a worldview that is unique to all situations and circumstances. And we talked about LinkedIn really early in the interview. And I just want to bring that up again, because LinkedIn is such a great place for you professionally to start crafting that voice of what are you going to portray out into the world. And the more connections that you make, and the more that you have an opinion on things that are happening in your industry, or just things that you're interested, they don't have to be directly related to your industry, but that really helps you stay top of mind for people who are on there looking. They're going to see, oh, this person, they're saying something, they're confident, they have a voice, and you might come up in their feed at the right moment when something comes up. So don't underestimate doing things like that early on in your career, because I think that helps you also hone your voice and your opinion so that when you do get called to the table, you're able to speak more confidently to what you believe.
It's, yeah, we'd call it, in Boeing or the governor's office, right? It's your elevator
Mm-hmm.
pitch, because you're going back. I don't know why the elevator keeps on coming back up, but it's this confined space where you've kind of kept people captive, but
Right.
you had no idea if you're going to be in the elevator with a senator or a congressperson or a state
Right.
representative or anybody. I mean,
Right.
they could be the head of the AFL-CIO, which
Right.
happened once. And yeah, you got to be prepared. That's your moment. And that kind of goes into is everybody, no matter who's listening, everybody is different. And
Mm-hmm.
everybody, hopefully, you're entitled to your own opinion. But I'd like to say you're not entitled to your own facts. Daniel Patrick Moynihan once said that. And everybody has that opinion. And there are going to be times, hopefully, that someone higher up or even, a colleague or somebody else is going to say, what are your thoughts on this?
Mm-hmm.
And you better be prepared, because I've been in rooms when people have been asked that and they had nothing to say.
Right.
And it really didn't work out well for them.
Right.
And you might not have an opinion. You might say, well, I never really thought about this issue. But you know what? I'm going to think about it. I'm going to get back to you.
Yeah.
But that's what I've noticed sometimes, and people make a career out of this in politics too, is you can be in a room with a politician and they can talk for an hour and a half, which happened once, and someone leans over and says, Michael, did you notice that that one person never expressed their own opinion? And it didn't make you feel that great about them as a
Right.
leader.
Right.
And then I can start seeing that as a common thread at the national level with this person. And so that goes back into sometimes in my own career, I didn't keep to my own voice, and people have come back to me. It's like, what happened? I loved your voice. So you're gonna, like, we all stray a little, right? And that's just, the more you become a leader, it doesn't have to be the CEO. You can just be the leader in your field. You can be the leader on your floor.
Right.
There's responsibility with leaders, a little extra work with it.
Right. And I think that speaks to having people in your circle who are willing to call that out for
Yes.
you, and then you being willing to hear it.
And honest, there's a couple of things. Is some of the hardest things to get and secure is honest feedback.
Mm-hmm.
Number one, and how to learn to be involve yourself in healthy, which turns into healthy confrontation. And it's how you approach. That's where, like, the executive coaching or a good mentor or other folks are being in an environment where you witness other people doing it. And you're like, I want to learn that. Because that's a lot of reasons we're in situations in our lives and where we stand in a lot of ways today is people don't know how to confront each other
Mm-hmm.
in a healthy, constructive way.
Right.
And I think there's just so much. It'd be great if companies and other folks in these schools did more and more training on some of these things.
Yes. Yes. For all my higher ed people out there listening, because I know I get them. Do that training. Make them take the communication courses and conflict management.
Yes, negotiation, conflict management.
Yes. Yes, so helpful. Okay, I want to do some specific resourcing for our audience. One thing that I love to do is give them some tangible resources from the guests to help them in their journey. So what is one book that you have read, and it might be a couple, whatever you want to share, that changed your perspective on your career or your life?
I mean, there's been a lot of them and at different stages in my life. One of the people I've really kind of listened to, who has an amazing voice, is Simon Sinek.
Yes.
Finding the Why, and then Leaders Eat Last.
Mm-hmm.
Because he kind of gets to the heart of the matter. Because it's a great line. I don't know if somebody I forgot who came up with it, but it was just like, is it thoughts become words, words become action, action becomes behavior, behavior becomes habit.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Something along those lines. And it shows you what Simon does when it talks about leadership. It talks about people. and how we treat others,
Yes.
and what's really motivating us and what's influencing us. Going back into, if you're in a healthy environment, the oxytocin, now you get the chemical reaction, is reinforced.
Right.
You're in a hostile environment. The moment you leave a company from a hostile environment, it could take you 6 months to 18 months to get and change and not bring that hostility into your new place. So it's
Yes.
understanding yourself. A lot of things I really enjoy reading are biographies of
Okay.
people that are interesting, have done interesting things. And I tend to fall into a lot of the presidential, biographies or leaders in the kind of Churchill, or my favorite book of all time is Long Walk to Freedom, Nelson
Okay.
Mandela,
Yeah. That's
because
great.
this kind of goes into, you think about how he's managed his life with a particular mindset. He didn't know he was going to be president of South Africa at some point.
Right.
All he knew is he had a certain value system that he stuck with, and he had certain principles he stood for,
Mm-hmm.
and he defended them for 25 years in jail.
Mm-hmm.
And then on the other end of the spectrum is one of the best books ever about kind of leadership and management is Profiles in Power by Richard Reeves and John F. Kennedy.
Mm.
And you think about the 3 limited years of 1,000 days he spent in office and what he dealt with. The
Right.
Bay of Pigs and nuclear missile crisis, and other things. He didn't seem like he was the greatest human being, but he was capable of making good decisions,
Mm-hmm.
some flawed and some not. And then Peter Drucker, obviously, and his management style. When you think about a lot of things he's written.
Okay, for those who don't know, my job before I left full-time work to start the business was actually at the Peter F. Drucker and Masatoshi Ito School of Management at Claremont Graduate University. So, oh man, am I well versed in Peter Drucker? we just eat, slept, and breathed him all the time. So I love it when people bring up his content and his quotes and his books, because he was so transformative in the management side of things. And anything I've read of his has been just life-changing.
I did not know that about you, because a good friend of mine is heading up the development for all of CGU, and I'm good friends with the new president of CGU, Len Jessup. And
yes,
when Len started, we got a little tour of Peter Drucker's house.
Oh, I've done that tour. Yes. Yes.
And what does it remind me? I can't find the card. It's escaping me. One of the things that really moved me was world leaders would come visit that house. He's got his office with his typewriter, but he gave him little cards to fill out. And on top of a blank note card, it said something like, what's the difference you want to make in the world, or something like that. And no matter who these people were in their station in life, someone would write a little note and just give it to them.
I don't remember that, but
that's not what it was. I'll find it and I'll share with you.
That's awesome. That's so great. So Kristen
Daly.
Yes. Okay. That's how I found you on LinkedIn then.
That's how. Okay.
We're making connections live in the interview.
Yes, yeah, wonderful.
She must have commented on something that you posted or something like that, and that's how I got connected with you.
Health consortium over there, yeah.
Yes. So her and I worked together. We were both at Drucker at the same time before she moved into the role that she has now.
Yes.
Yes.
There we go. Okay, we figured that out.
Yes.
And if people haven't read too, one of the other fascinating books is what's his name? Yuval Noah Harari, and it's Sapiens, A Brief History of Mankind.
Oh.
Yes, that is a book that I couldn't put down.
Is it more like anthropological viewpoint?
It's really the founding of man and the evolution or slow devolution of man. But over time, because you've got the Cro-Magnon, you got the Denisovans, you've got the you've got Homo sapiens and all that. It's like there was kind of an overlap of all these people at different times, but it goes back to the interesting part of, as people evolved in one part of the world, they started coming into other people's territory, which either provided trade routes or provided conflict.
Right.
And it just talks about how mankind over time, how they've interacted amongst each other,
Mm-hmm.
where at some point we created aircraft because of it, and other times we've killed many people because of it. But it just, to me, it was fascinating because once again, it goes to, no matter how much we talk about management, organizational structure, organizational behavior, cubicles and offices and all these other things, is human beings are just, they're fascinating creatures.
Mm-hmm.
And they're just, there are a lot of them are wired differently. And this goes back to that, how do you have healthy confrontation or the building of healthy relationships and whittling away, mitigating any distrust um,
Right.
in it? Because yeah, we all want to. You always keep some sense of privacy about your life,
Mm-hmm.
but it's nice to, you know, be able to build networks and
Right.
grow as human beings. So you gain wisdom as you get older. Then there's the race to use that wisdom.
Right. Right. Okay, I will link all of those books that Michael mentioned in the blog post for this episode. So if you couldn't jot them down, I'll definitely put them there. And some of them are going to go on my list too. So you might see me doing reviews of them later in the year as I continue my reading journey. Okay, so I want to get a little bit more into the work that you're doing with the coalition for the last couple of minutes that we have together, because I think this is what initially drew me to you, because with the pandemic and all these different things going on, I think the future of the economy and jobs, specifically in the Los Angeles area, where it's just an interesting conglomeration of industries and different levels of workers, as we mentioned earlier. I would love to know, what are some of the key initiatives that the coalition is championing right now to help with some of the economic and job stability in the LA region?
Sure. We're looking at the most critical thing California faces and Los Angeles faces is, how does it remain economically competitive in a rapidly changing 21st century economy?
Mm-hmm.
And that's really the competition, is for the best asset anybody can have is skilled workers, you know, and good people.
Mm-hmm.
And you got them, you know, the more you can get closely together in denser areas, then you've got the collective intelligence, the overflow, which has created many of fabulous things. California's issue is a lot of people that have come here no longer feel that they're getting a good return on their investment, i.e. the taxes they pay, the fees they pay, or all the other stuff. And, you know, sunshine is great. The lifestyle is great. I enjoy it very much. But some people feel like, you know, what COVID has done is accelerated people's mindset or companies' mindsets on, wow, the grass might actually be greener in Austin, Texas, Scottsdale, Arizona. And that's, but it kind of lends into, as we tackle, like you can go into the really big picture, progressivity on taxes is, do we feel like as a nation, it's a good thing? Do we want states competing against each other, where California has a personal income tax that ends up funding a lot of great things, from roads to schools to public health initiatives and other things, to some states that have no state income tax. So, you know, they're basing it on they're taxing in different ways.
Mm-hmm.
But then again, sometimes the social security net or education and health and human services and other things are underfunded. And so, I mean, in a sense, we don't want states competing against each other too much.
Mm-hmm.
But back to California's problem is, you know, we do have an issue where I think a lot of people feel like you're not getting a return on investment. People who have high wealth or high income earners, there's still only so many places in the world you can make $1 million. Fortunately, California is one of those places, so people are still coming here. But some of the people that have made some winnings have decided to pick up and leave. And unfortunately, they bash California as they leave. But I say, the only reason you are who you are is because of California. You should say thank you.
Right.
So we need to compete against getting, either cultivating the next generation of these leaders here, or attracting them, you know, from around the world. We don't have trouble attracting, but domestically too.
Mm-hmm.
But in order to keep them here, we need to make sure we have more affordable housing across the board. at all income levels.
Yes.
We've done a good job of building a ton of luxury houses, and the people get density bonuses to build luxury, and they throw just a couple of units for low affordability on the right, but we build no middle housing. That's one. The other two is, thinking about the state's tax system. What we do is we have a state tax system that's still based on a manufacturing economy from 50 years ago, not a sales economy, not a service economy. So we do not tax half of our multi-trillion-dollar economy. And by not taxing that, we go and rely on potentially some absurd number, like you take like 80,000 Californians probably represent, I don't know, anywhere from 30 to 40% of the general fund personal income tax revenue. So now if they pick up, because wealth can be extremely mobile, and move to Idaho, that's a lot of money. And that affects the teachers and the doctors, the nurses, and all the other stuff, and the nurses and firefighters and police. So our challenge is, once again, how do we remain economically competitive? That comes into, we need a better housing policies. We need a better tax system. And then we need, the other part too is we have regulatory agencies, we have code enforcement, we have all these great, wonderful things. But the problem is as we've created all these regulatory bodies, they're very myopic. My job is to focus on water. Mine focuses on air. Mine focuses on workplace safety. And sometimes there's overlap, but there's not working relationships. So you could be the head of the Port of LA, you could be the head of a large company, and you get 10 different calls from 10 different regulatory agencies, all telling you different things. And next thing you're like, this is nuts. Right. So like, I'm already paying taxes, and now I'm paying taxes for you to come and bother me all day and not help me. So that's another piece. And the other day too, is we got the amount of people that are participating in the workforce is going down, not just in California, but throughout the country. So, right, you have fewer people who want to engage, actively looking for work for different reasons. And we're not getting them excited to be entrepreneurs. That's the challenge of, you could work for a great company, but if you want to go leave and start your own company, you have a great idea, you don't want to leave that health plan. So until we figure out our healthcare system, which if you look at the homeless situation, separate from the lack of housing, part of other countries like Canada and England and other places, you don't see as many homeless because they have universal health care. I know it's an expensive proposal, but if you did it right and you cleaned up the concentration of the healthcare system, then you can actually be able to provide better access to things that potentially won't leave people pushing them onto the street. So there's a lot of things, but we're really economic competitiveness, housing. Those are kind of the two drivers for 2021.
Right. Great. Thank you for that insight. I appreciate that. I'm not going to try to talk on any of those topics because I am no expert on that. So I appreciate you coming and sharing that with us. And one more question to round out this amazing conversation we've been having. I've been loving all the information and tips and perspective. I think it's been so great. Actually, two more questions. I lied. Two more questions. One is, what do you see as the opportunities moving forward in the next 10, 15 years in that LA area, Southern California area? Like, what industries do you think are really gonna explode, or that you see potentially moving in, so that people have an idea of where some opportunity might be?
I think LA has all the opportunities in the world, and we also have the challenges too. But if I was somebody and I was looking around, it's like, yeah, where would I want to go that's exciting? Probably have a good, rewarding career. New space, because what happened is Boeing's and Raytheon, Northrop all dominated the government contract world. Elon Musk came in with new space, cheaper fuels, better manufacturing materials, and all that other stuff. So
Mm.
new space is going to be a 600, I think, billion-dollar industry. And you can work on the next, rocket to Mars, or the vehicle that's going to be up there, or the things they're going to test the elements up there.
Right.
That's fascinating. And satellite building, the blue economy is fascinating. Something like 90% of the world's oceans, which cover 70 something 3% of our planet, have not been mapped.
Mm.
And it's the all think about all that exists there.
Right.
We've sustained most of our protein in the world comes from our seafood stock and from
Mm.
the ocean, or biomimicry, understanding how a muscle attaches to a jetty could be used to understand how to make adhesives that aren't toxic.
Right.
Um,
Right.
so the blue economy, regenerative seaweed, and all this other stuff. So blue
Mhm.
economy, anything healthcare has been immune from any recession,
Right.
and it's only going to continue to grow, especially as next 10 years, 20% of our population is going to be 65 years old and older.
Right.
And then there's issues of lifestyle diseases and healthcare. I've seen anybody, you can you can be a doctor, you can be a nurse. You could start as a janitor at Cedars, and they have workforce development programs that you can become a nurse practitioner or a doctor or head the company one day. And
Great.
then there's all the other smart devices. Like, how do you do preemptive wellness programs?
Right.
If there's a bad air day, how do you push out notification to make sure parents give their kids the medicine so they don't have to take it to the emergency room?
Right.
It not only impacts the family, but it's a $25,000 per trip cost in the healthcare system. And so healthcare is phenomenal. And, anything involving tech,
Right.
digitization, and all the other stuff. So, yeah, I mean, there's a lot of opportunity.
Well, and one thing I always like to remind people, there are going to be jobs that are specific to some of these industries that are specialized and all of that. But there's also a business side to all of these industries as well. So if you think, oh, I'm interested in space and I want to go that route, or I'm interested in the oceans and water and what that looks like, or healthcare, but I want to do accounting, or I want to do marketing, or I want to do, one of these other functional areas, human resources, something like that. That still exists for all of those companies. And so that's the one thing that I want people to realize, it's not just those specialized positions that'll go into that. It's the whole business end of it as well. And actually, I think either the week after this airs or a week or two after this airs, I will have a CFO for a healthcare community health center on to talk about the business side of healthcare, for that reason, because I think people forget.
Yeah, and there's a lot of healthcare jobs that you don't even need a 2-year or 4-year degree.
Yes.
So yeah, think about there's so many different jobs at every different level for every different credential in a lot of these industries.
Right.
And so yeah, and the thing is if you're an accountant, why not be an accountant in a particular field that you love what the company does too?
Absolutely.
So
Absolutely. Okay, my last question, again, helping resource people for those who are in the LA area, because I know I do have a pretty heavy concentration in Southern California, because that's where I'm from. What are some resources that you think people really need to know about, and maybe some resources that aren't as obvious that people can learn about?
yes, I saw that question you shared, and I mean, number one, you've really got to tap your own network or ask a friend to make an introduction of 3 other people. But remember, as you resource your network, is you're asking somebody to potentially carve. It's not, it takes a little time. If I've been asked to make connections, I have to figure out who the right contacts are, what the right message is. I got to make sure they're okay with the introduction. So it's like, be prepared.
Right.
I think the greatest resource is your network, the 1 to the 3 and the 3 to the 9. You can just exponential it, but be prepared to say, I've got an email I'd like to shoot to you. Say, this is who I am. This is what I want to do. And I've asked for this help. so you can fire it off to your person. I think that's kind of, I think it's start with your own network first. Secondly, if you really want to learn about industries, yeah, always feel free to, you can share my contact information, shoot some stuff. But there, there's the LA Economic Development Corporation that talks about where our economy is going, where they have some data and all the other stuff. Another great resource is, even if you didn't, like I have all the college presidents from all the universities in the region, is I get their newsletters and their magazines. And I'm like, I read through some of this and look at what they're, tackling diseases and other things. And there's always something where they highlight an employee on campus at Dominguez Hills or LA Community, in the community colleges or something. And you learn so much through those. So kind of seek out, if you're looking industry specific, is go seek out what they're pushing out for newsletters. Because whether it's the Wonderful Company, they have their newsletter, Cedars has their newsletter, UCLA, USC, and then just sometimes going back into my yellow pages is just have fun with Google. Yep. Sit down with a glass of wine or a beer or a scotch or whatever you do and drink some water and sit down for an hour and just what drives you, what interests you, and start Googling and see who's actually a thought leader on that.
Right.
Or actually who's writing about it, and start there too. Because we live in a world where I think, you gotta seek out your opportunities. Nobody's gonna pick up the phone and just say, hey, I've got this well-paying, high-positioned, secure for the next 25 years job for you.
Yes.
Because you got to seek it out and plus you have a good story. Look at me, I have a good story to tell. It wasn't because my dad knew anybody. It was because I picked up the yellow pages. I had some good support from my parents, but I did it because I picked up something and I just it's not going to come to me.
Yeah.
So
that's great. That's great. Michael, thank you so much for being on the podcast, sharing all your wisdom and your years of experience in government and the work that you're doing now. I so appreciate it. Where can people connect with you if they want to learn more?
They can go to the coalition's website, is the lacoalition.com. They can find me on LinkedIn under Michael Kelly, with probably, I don't know, there's tons of Michael Kellys, but probably
I'll link it into the blog post for everybody.
That way too, and they can read some of the stuff I posted and look at some of my background in the coalition. And if somebody has something reasonable to chat about or anything else or a question, then feel free to shoot me a note.
That's great. That's great. Thank you so much. I so appreciate you taking the time.
And thank you so much for what you do.